Kiev has launched its biggest drone barrage on Russia in over a year.
A Russian fuel tanker is moving along a highway in occupied southern Ukraine. It's daytime. The driver has no idea a Ukrainian drone operator somewhere in a basement apartment is already watching him through a camera feed, sipping instant coffee, waiting. The tanker never reaches Crimea. That strike was the opening move in a campaign that's rattling supply officers all the way back to Moscow. And the road that tanker was driving on? One of Moscow's most strategically critical supply lines on the entire planet. Russia used 3 years of full-scale war to build it. Ukraine just started dismantling it with weapons that cost less than a used Toyota. That road wasn't just a supply route, it was the entire southern strategy. After February 2022, Russia did something it had never done before in this war. It built an empire on a single road. The route runs from Taganrog in Russia, cuts southwest through Mariupol, drops down through Berdiansk, passes Melitopol, and swings south through Henichesk all the way to Crimea. On a map, it looks like a scar across southern Ukraine, and functionally, that's exactly what it was designed to be, a permanent scar, a fait accompli carved in asphalt and occupied territory. Moscow poured money and engineering into it after 2022. Bridges reinforced, checkpoints built, bypasses added. Russian military planners referred to this corridor, internally, proudly, as the land bridge to Crimea. It let them move fuel, ammunition, troops, and equipment without using a single ferry crossing or risking the Kerch Bridge, which Ukraine had already demonstrated it could reach. For 3 years, the corridor was basically untouchable at depth. Ukrainian drones were mostly a frontline problem. If you were 100 kilometers behind the contact line, you were safe. If you were 160 kilometers back, you were basically on vacation. That assumption just expired. The weapon at the center of this story is not a cruise missile. It doesn't cost millions. It's not launched from an aircraft. It's the FP-2, a Ukrainian-made medium-range attack drone built by a company called Firepoint, and it has fundamentally redrawn the threat map for Russian logistics in the south. The FP-2 carries a warhead of up to 105 kilograms. Its range extends to 200 kilometers from the front line. It can hit a fixed target autonomously through pre-programmed guidance or a moving target when an operator steers it through a live radio link, meaning it's equal parts cruise missile and FPV drone, depending on what it needs to be that day. Russia used to have a relatively safe operational rear, the zone between 20 and 200 kilometers from contact. Ukrainian drones simply couldn't reach it reliably. Russia's own elite strike units, including the Rubicon Center, were hammering Ukrainian bases up to 200 kilometers deep. Ukraine had no comparable answer until it built one. By early 2026, FP-2 production was scaling. Strikes were going deeper. And on April 2nd, 6 FP-2s hit the Kirovsky Air Base in occupied Crimea. One punched through a reinforced metal hangar door and detonated inside, destroying 4 Russian Orion reconnaissance drones, each valued by open-source analysts at over $5 million. A metal hangar, by the way, can stop a small FPV. It cannot stop a 105-kilogram warhead traveling at speed through its front door. The Orions were still sitting inside when the fire reached them. Robert Brovdy goes by Magyar. You may recognize the name from an earlier episode on this channel, the 414th Brigade commander who built Ukraine's most feared aerial reconnaissance and drone strike capability essentially from scratch. He commands Ukraine's unmanned systems forces now, and he is not a man who softens his assessments. In April, 6 FP-2 drones with warheads in the 100-kilogram class were used against a Russian command post in Kadivka. Magyar went public with criticism of the warhead quality on some of the systems used. Not the drones, not the targeting, the warheads. He was publicly demanding better manufacturing standards from Ukrainian defense industry while a war was happening around him. This is where Ukrainian drone warfare actually is in May 2026. They're not celebrating capability. They're arguing about tolerances. They're debating whether a warhead that works 85% of the time is acceptable when you have a 200-kilometer flight and one shot. The answer for Magyar is clearly no. And Firepoint is listening. The company has confirmed it's developing an extended range version of the FP-2, same warhead class. Greater reach, designed to preserve the strike weight while pushing the engagement envelope beyond 200 kilometers. What that means for Russian logistics nodes just outside FP-2 range is a conversation the Russian General Staff is having right now, presumably in a room with no windows. In May 2026, Ukraine's military intelligence agency HUR published footage from an operation conducted in April. The unit responsible was called the Primary, which translates rather perfectly as the Ghosts. The Ghosts didn't hit a depot. They didn't hit a warehouse. They hit moving Russian military freight trains, 5 of them, while the locomotives were still in motion inside occupied Crimea. Precision strikes on locomotives hauling military equipment and fuel tankers, all conducted while the trains were rolling. One tanker car caught fire and the blaze spread down the track. HUR described the targeted rail section as, and I'm quoting directly here, a key logistical artery on the occupied territory of Zaporizhzhia Oblast and Crimea. The reason that rail line matters so much is structural. It's essentially the only track in that zone connecting Russian-held territory to Crimea. One burning fuel tanker on the wrong section of track and the entire corridor backs up. Repairs take days. The fire takes a day just to extinguish. Russian occupation authorities responded by declaring a police interception plan, increasing military patrols and tightening checkpoints across occupied Zaporizhzhia, which is, to be honest, a bit like locking the barn door, while Primary is photographing your next locomotive from orbit. There's a category of source in this war that's genuinely useful precisely because it's embarrassing: Russian military telegram channels. These aren't nationalist mill bloggers who support the invasion, but also can't help telling the truth when the news is bad, because their credibility depends on it. On May 11th, multiple Russian pro-war channels acknowledged something Moscow's official statements would never touch. Ukrainian drones, long-range systems using Starlink-enabled guidance, were now striking targets 160 to 200 kilometers behind the front line. Specifically, they were hitting the Mariupol-Berdiansk highway, the main road, the corridor. Alexei Zhivov called it an extremely alarming signal for both military and civilian logistics. Romanov was blunter. He posted footage of a burned tanker on the highway and said simply, "This is no longer a rear area road." For a Russian military blogger in 2026 to say that out loud requires some courage, because the implication is enormous. Russia's entire southern strategy, the permanent occupation of the land bridge, the connection to Crimea, the ability to resupply the front, rests on that road being usable. If it becomes a kill zone, the math of the whole war changes. That's what the Russian bloggers themselves are saying, which means the Kremlin's press office is running about 3 news cycles behind reality. In early May 2026, footage emerged of a Ukrainian FP-2 drone filming itself firing a rocket mid-flight over occupied Crimea. The target was a Russian mobile fire group, one of those truck-mounted machine gun teams Russia deploys along drone approach routes specifically to shoot down incoming unmanned systems before they reach their targets. The FP-2 simply fired a rocket at the people shooting at it, then continued toward its primary objective. This isn't a weapon system, it's a hunting drone that shoots back. OSINT analyst Harbuz assessed the munition as an unguided aircraft rocket mounted under the wing. Dennis Stielerman, co-founder of Firepoint, watched the same footage and commented publicly, "We can do this too," which is either a statement about Ukrainian capability or the most understated competitive product announcement in modern defense history. Probably both. Separately, Ukrainian forces have been operating what some outlets are calling a drone mothership. The larger FP-1 carrier aircraft deploying 2 FPV drones in flight. The FP-1 acts as a delivery vehicle, flying deep into range before releasing the FPVs to make their final attack runs. The FPVs get the range of a long-range aircraft and the precision of a first-person operator. Russia's air defense network was built to stop cruise missiles and aircraft. It was not built to stop a drone that travels 180 kilometers, shoots back when intercepted, and then releases 2 more drones before anyone can recalculate. Russia knows Ukrainian drones can't permanently sever a highway. The Kremlin's public line has been dismissive for exactly that reason. But the analysis from the Institute for the Study of War tells a more complicated story. The ISW's April assessment noted a measurable rise in geolocated Ukrainian medium-range strikes across eastern and southern Ukraine, particularly against logistics targets and assets linked to Russian offensive preparations. And what sustained drone pressure does to a supply route isn't destruction, it's friction. The convoy moves at night instead of day. The driver takes the long route because the direct road had 3 burning tankers on it last week. The battalion commander's ammunition arrives 2 days late because someone upstream decided to break the shipment into smaller loads after the last ambush. None of those decisions show up in a satellite image. All of them degrade combat power. Defense Matters described it precisely. Regular drone attacks would make movement slower, less predictable, and more dependent on concealment, electronic warfare, air defense cover, and nighttime transport. The Russian command isn't just losing vehicles. The convoy commander doesn't file a report when he decides to split the column. It shows up on the front line 6 weeks later. If this kind of analysis is useful to you, the mechanics underneath the headlines, the subscribe button is right there. This channel exists because enough people decided it was worth their time. That assumption about depth didn't just shape Russian doctrine. It shaped everything physical, where the depots sit, how the convoys are organized, how many soldiers guard a fuel depot 180 kilometers from the front versus a trench. Russian analysis circulating on Telegram in May 2026 identified the structural problem directly. As drone strikes push deeper, Russia's rear areas require the same density of air defense, interceptor crews, anti-drone net installations, and security personnel as the front, except the rear is much larger than the front. You cannot cover a 200-kilometer deep logistics zone the same way you cover a 10-kilometer trench line. The numbers don't work. The personnel isn't there. Russia discovered this the same way most armies discover things, by having it happen to them. One Russian channel, citing the Starshii Eddy military analysis project, noted that sustaining offensive operations now requires several times more support personnel in the rear than soldiers directly on the contact line, and that as drone pressure grows, that ratio gets worse, not better. You end up with a situation where killing 20 Russian tankers on a highway has secondary effects that ripple through operational planning for weeks. Not because 20 tankers is strategically decisive, because of what each commander between here and Crimea does differently the next morning. In the last 2 weeks of April alone, Ukraine's SBU hit Russian ships, radars, and airfields across Crimea. Special Operations Forces put a drone into a concealed Iskander missile storage site near Ovrashki, 40 kilometers east of Simferopol. The exact systems Russia keeps loaded to fire at Ukrainian cities, a naval command center, a traffic control installation, all in the same month. By the end of that month, reportedly 7 Russian military bases across Crimea had been hit. The 7th was Berdiansk. 1 week into May 2026, the Kirovsky Air Base, already hit in October 2025, was struck a second time, with the FP-2 warheads inflicting significantly more damage than the first raid. The Russians had apparently rebuilt and restocked. Ukraine apparently made a note of that. From Ukraine's GUR, a separate unit called Phantom was launching FPV drones from uncrewed surface vessels, drone boats, targeting Russian radar installations on Crimea's southern tip. Those radars, specifically the Podlet K-1 systems and air defense arrays near AI Patry, are part of the network that protects the northwestern Black Sea and makes Storm Shadow and long-range kamikaze drone ingress routes more dangerous. Take out the radars and the approach corridors open up. It's like pulling threads from a sweater. Each one seems small. Eventually, the whole thing comes undone. Firepoint's next FP-2 variant carries the same warhead class at extended range, still Ukrainian-made, and production is scaling. If Ukraine reaches consistent strike depth past 200 kilometers, the Mariupol, Berdiansk, Melitopol highway isn't the only route in the picture. The rail lines running through occupied Donetsk and the logistics nodes feeding the entire southern group of Russian forces come into range. The Ghosts have already demonstrated they can hit a moving locomotive. What happens when the targets they can reach doubles? The Kremlin's answer so far has been to deploy more mobile fire groups along drone corridors measures, accelerate its own drone production, and attempt electronic warfare suppression of Ukrainian Starlink-guided systems. None of those responses scale well enough to match the problem. Mobile fire groups are now getting rocket-armed FP-2s fired at them mid-approach. Electronic warfare suppression is being outpaced by autonomous guidance modes that don't need a radio link to hit a fixed target. And Russian drone production, while growing, is still largely dependent on imported components running through sanctioned supply chains. Ukraine can't win this war with drones alone, but Ukraine can make Russia's rear areas functionally ungovernable for logistics, slow the convoys, burn the fuel, expose the corridors, force dispersal, force night movement, force smaller loads until the cumulative friction of it all shows up somewhere ugly on the front line. That burned tanker on the Berdiansk highway, the locomotive fire inside Crimea, the radar station on Petri with a drone boat FPV stuck in its base. These are not isolated incidents. They are data points in a pattern that Russian commanders are watching with considerable unease, and that Ukrainian operators are watching with something considerably more satisfying. The convoy on the Crimean road never made it. The question now is how many more won't.